So, hello, we recognize you, we see you, not physically. But,
they all started panicking.
Yeah, no, we cannot physically see you, but we see that you are there. Just to the attendees that have already joined us, just give us a few minutes. We usually like to wait a couple minutes and make sure everybody joins us. So just hang in there. So how are you ladies this morning?
Very good.
Feeling refreshed.
It's what? The middle of the week. Mm-hmm. If anybody can remember.
Hump day.
No, what day of the week it is.
I love that commercial. Wait, what day is it? What day is it?
Seven told me a really good line. She told me it was Blur's Day.
Blur's Day.
She said all the days just blur, and today's Blur's Day. I said, I like that.
Blur's Day is cute. That's very cute.
Julie, how are things in your house with homeschooling with your daughter?
Let me just put it this way. I am counting down the moments until it's done for the semester, and hoping and praying we're not starting the school year off, especially since it's going to be high school, with the same situation. Because
really tough, huh?
while it is not as hands-on as it would be with a smaller child, the lack of real semblance to a day and managing a teenager is a little bit tougher. Getting them up in the morning, I mean, as we've discussed a little bit, there's not a lot of live video conferencing going on with the students, so they're like, why do I need to get up? I have nothing I have to do at a certain time, and so, trying to get a teenager to get up is a little tough.
Yeah, we are hearing the same thing from clients who have children of all ages. It's especially difficult with the younger kids, as you mentioned. Not to minimize the challenges you're having with your teenage daughter, but yeah, it's a hard thing. We have to, for us to keep our license current, we have to take CLEs, and often taking them online is a challenge for me. And I'm interested in the topic, and I've had to.
Yeah.
And I have clients who have several children. We have 2 or 3 kids of different ages, and the little ones can't turn on Zoom themselves. They need help, and then they need help working with things. Then you have an older kid who needs something else, and the parent has to go to work.
Right.
The parent has meetings as well, and it's just chaotic.
Yeah.
It's awful, and people don't want to homeschool. This is not what you're used to doing.
Yeah. Well, and I would imagine actually, it's even that much harder. I mean, my husband and I are both here, and so we're managing it. But I mean, if you're a single parent and you're trying to manage your job, your children, and your household, and you're all in that same house, I feel for them. I'm sure you have a number of clients, but
and then imagine
all 3 of you.
It's hard. Especially when people are in small apartments with several kids.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
Okay, we've had a couple other people join. We're just going to give it another minute. I'm out in Long Island right now, and I was also excited to see today, though, that Long Island is in phase 2 of the reopening, and the hair salons are opening back up. And not as much for me am I excited about this as I am for my husband, because he really, I say made me, but he kept... we had a pair of shears that he had me cut his hair with a couple weeks ago, and it was not a good outcome. So
I've cut my mother's hair. I have a friend who either rediscovered in the closet or ordered a brand new Flowbee. Do you guys remember?
No.
The Flowbee? Yeah.
I don't remember it. What's the Flowbee?
It's basically a vacuum.
Oh,
A vacuum that you...
It's got a clipper on it.
Under your head, and it sucks the hair in and cuts it.
Paige, I think we've got, there might be a couple people who join on, but I think we can probably get started. So I'm going to have you get going.
Great. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us this morning for our AZ Coffee Talk on the repercussions of disparagement and parental alienation. Our coffee talks are free. They are meant to offer timely expert education on divorce, family, and matrimonial law topics. We are recording this session, so please feel free to, we will be sending out a link to the recording, and please feel free to share that link with anyone you know who might benefit from the topics that we're covering today. And you can always have that link to go back to if there's ever anything that you need to reference in the future. In case you haven't formally met our team, let me start with some introductions. My name is Paige Zandri, and I'm joined by my partner. Give a little wave, Lauren Artese. Together, we formed Artese Zandri PLLC, which is a boutique divorce litigation and mediation firm based in New York City. We're also joined by our wonderful Director of Operations, Julie Kauser, who makes all of this possible, and our very esteemed guest this morning, Barbara Rothberg, who is a licensed family and couples therapist. She is a parenting coordinator and also a mediator. So let me just pass it over to Barbara. If you want to make a quick introduction, give us some background, let everybody know who you are.
Oh, thank you. Well, I have been a family and couple therapist for about 40 years. So I've really met many, many couples and have been dealing with divorce for most of my career because, when there's marriage, there's divorce. And the divorce rate is about 50%. And I did way before there was divorce mediation, a long time ago, I did my dissertation on custody mediation because I had divorced early and had 2 young children, and we had a very amiable divorce and were able to work our issues out. And I decided that's what I wanted to do for my career and help people do the same thing. So that kind of pushed me into doing divorce mediation and then parent coordination so I could help high conflict couples work out their relationships so they can ideally raise happy, healthy kids. So that's what I do.
We're happy to have you here with us today. I'm going to hand it over now to Julie, who's just going to go over a little bit of the housekeeping.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for everybody who's joined us. We, just so everybody knows, we try to keep the discussion focused around the 4 of us and some questions that we know we want to make sure get covered, and we'll do that for about 20 to 30 minutes. And then we're going to open it up to you all for Q&A. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a little Q&A box. If anything throughout the discussion, raises something in your mind, or you've come prepared with questions, just pop your questions in there. We will either weave them. I will either have our panelists address them throughout the discussion, or we'll pick them up at the end, but I promise we will cover anything that you put in there. So please, we want this to be as interactive as possible. Before we really, dig in on what is alienation and disparagement, I just want to take a second and have Lauren and Paige chat for a second as to, while this topic is very evergreen, it's something we always need to have at the tops of our minds. There was an incident recently in one of the courts that really raised some thoughts in our minds, and I want them to chat about that just for a quick second before we launch into the rest of it. So I'm going to have you guys kind of chat about that.
So Julie's referring to a case. It wasn't in New York State. It was in Massachusetts, and it was recent. And I don't know if any of you had an opportunity to read the blog that Paige wrote in connection to this decision. We advise our clients and we talk to our clients about custody issues at great length, as you can imagine. And we're always discussing with them what's appropriate in terms of social media and posting on social media. Social media is such an important part of people's lives today, and you can access so much information on there. You can get so much information out. So we found this decision to be very interesting and a little alarming. So the case is Shack v. Shack. And what the court ultimately decided, just to keep it simple, is that the father in the case was posting on social media, derogatory information, going after the mother, and there were children involved. So this obviously was brought up by the mom's counsel to the court, and the court actually made a decision that the High Court in Massachusetts ruled that the father's right to publicly disparage his wife on social media outweighed, based on this idea of free speech, the concerns relating to the children's psychological and emotional well-being. So it really is a freedom of speech issue, but I think Paige and I have discussed this at length, and I know there was some commentary on the blog postings that we had sent out from other lawyers who were kind of shocked that this decision came down. And it's very different. In New York State, we don't think a decision like that would ever come down, because New York really puts a heavy emphasis and sees an importance in non-disparagement and in parents not putting their children, in the middle of the divorce, or allowing their children to have access to, posts or information that would be derogatory to the other parent. So we're going to get into that. But this kind of triggered that maybe we should have some sort of webinar in connection to disparagement and get some education out there to parents who are dealing with this. So I don't know, Paige, if you want to add anything.
I mean, I would just echo what you've already said, which is that, the courts in New York come out totally differently on this issue. And it sounded as though that was actually the standard course for the courts in Massachusetts. And so what happens typically, and we'll get into this in more detail, is that, orders get issued by the court automatically that prevent either party from being able to, or are meant to prevent, disparagement. And we were just shocked by the opinion, and thought we really needed to say that we respectfully disagree with how that case came out, because we have experienced on both sides, from the parents' perspective and the children's perspective, how this disparagement, it really has a damaging impact on the children. It has a damaging impact on parents' custody determinations, and it has a damaging impact on your ability to co-parent. So it's a really important issue, and we're glad everyone's here today to talk about it with us.
Yeah, and I think while it's not hopefully something that would happen in New York, it does set a weird precedence that was concerning to us.
I'm just wondering if there was an AFC involved in a case like that, because I can't imagine an AFC accepting that as a positive outcome.
Can you explain what an AFC is, Barbara, real quick?
I'm not a lawyer. How about one of you lawyers?
Oh, what's an AFC? I don't know what an AFC is.
An AFC is attorney for the child, but maybe I'm not a lawyer. One of the lawyers could be more specific.
Sure, no problem. So in any case where there's a custody issue and it's disputed, the courts are going to assign an attorney for the child or children. And
Got it.
Because the children have an interest in the outcome of any custody orders and decisions on parenting time and access and decision making. So the attorney for the child joins the case and is involved in the entire proceeding relating to the custody. So just equally as involved as the attorney for the mom and the attorney for the dad, or the attorney for the partners and parents.
Got it. So AFC, just for our audience's sake, AFC means attorney for the child or attorney for the children. I just wanted to make sure we're
as a PC, I have often talked to AFC's attorney for the children, because they represent the children, and I work with both parents.
Yeah.
And it can really even bring a child into a meeting with me. I'm trained in child inclusive mediation. So occasionally, I've also been a family therapist. So occasionally I bring a child in to get a child's perspective, to understand what that child feels and make an assessment of how that child's actions affect the parent, how the parents affect the child. So it shocks me.
Yeah. That was the ruling. Because we're trying to focus on what's in the best interest of the child, and at the end of the day, that wasn't held at the top. So, Barbara, why don't we just go ahead and for definition's sake, why don't we talk about, from a therapist standpoint, what is parental alienation, and what can qualify as, parental alienation from the therapist standpoint? And then Lauren and Paige in a second will flip it over and how the practicality of alienation then can kind of end up, what the reality of that can mean for a custody situation. So go ahead, Barbara. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Very simply, in easy words, it's one parent turning the child or children against the other parent for not very good reasons. I mean, that's basically what it means. More psychologically, it's using manipulative techniques that are sometimes conscious, sometimes not conscious, that turns the child away from the other parent and brings the child to a favorite parent against a different parent. So the children are then split. And sometimes it's overt, where parents, I have heard parents say things like, your mom really loves her new family better than she loves you, so you're really second, which is a horrible thing, because oftentimes people have second families, and it's a horrible thing to say to a child, and puts this child in this middle place. Or it could be more subtle to say something like, your dad is so busy, he works all the time, he really has no time for you, so you're better off spending time here. Now, that's a little bit more subtle, but it's also saying to the child that you don't belong to the other person's house, and saying that I'm the better parent, and pulling the child to you and away from the other parent. So any of these kinds of things, and there's a continuum. And of course, you talk about social media. There are things where things are posted, and if kids are old enough to read postings, then they see what one parent has posted against the other, and they end up feeling terrible. Then there's a loyalty conflict. I mean, we'll get into, as we talk a little bit, the effects of children, but just for definition, it's most simple to think about one parent turning the children against the other parent for generally the reasons of their anger, having nothing to do with the child. It's using the child in inappropriate ways.
And if I can just add to that, there's different ways of accomplishing that. And, as Barbara indicated, there's, kind of intentional, there's the intentional, and then there's the accidental, which can happen in these cases. Most people aren't divorced multiple times and don't have custody issue multiple times. So when they're going through this, they're going through it for the first time. So obviously, intentional alienation is much worse in terms of court for Paige and I to deal with an accidental, slip up and saying things that, not knowing how to respond to children's questions, like that's one thing. And then the intentional is another, but there's also different ways to accomplish it. And there's that overtly blocking access, like one parent blocking access of to the children from the other parent, or there's the psychological and emotional, which is more where you say things that influence the child, or in an attempt to influence the child to kind of be on your side. And I will obviously let Barbara talk about the long-term psychological effects, because that's her expertise. But in court, that is not a good thing. You do not want the court to see you as a parent who would interfere or block, access to the kids, or who is attempting to get the children on their side, or the child on their side, on your side. It's just, the courts are very, this is what they do, and their burden and what they are concerned about is the best interest of the children exclusively. That's the only thing they care about. They don't care about convenience for mom. They don't care about convenience for dad. They expect parents to change and adjust their lives to manage the children's lives. And in terms of, there's different levels of, there's different relationships, right? You have the non-custodial parent and the custodial parent. And the law in New York is clear and absolute on this, that if a custodial parent is not fostering the relationship between the children and the non-custodial parent, that's a problem. And that could end up resulting in the custody orders changing or being adjusted, and the parent that is, allegedly doing the alienating and blocking the access will not be named the custodial parent, because the court doesn't see them as capable of doing it, or the custody orders can be changed and the non-custodial parent can become the custodial parent. So, I just wanted to give it's very, very important and Barbara's going to expand on this for your court case and, for your access to your child and your relationship with your child, whether you're going to be the custodial or non-custodial, it's very important how you behave in terms of the children's relationship with the other parent.
Oh, go ahead, Paige. Sorry, I want
to add, just looping back to the discussion about the attorney for the children. That's if disparagement persists and becomes obvious to the judge in your case at an early stage or at any stage, if an AFC hasn't been appointed at that time, you can be sure that an AFC will be appointed once the judge feels as though there is a legitimate concern about disparagement. And so not only have you put yourself at a disadvantage with your child, with your case, but also now it's going to cost, the matter is going to cost you financially quite a bit more. And I was just going to actually say, I think, Barbara, you'll probably mention your role as parenting coordinator and how that's helpful in avoiding these situations where parents in conflict and where emotions run high can often fall into a trap of disparagement. But I just wanted to note that it's a very expensive mistake to make.
And Paige, on just very briefly on that, there's also the forensic and so what happens in cases where there's an allegation of disparagement and alienation, or there's any sort of evidence or inclination that that's going on, and there's a dispute over custody, the courts are going to assign an AFC, and then they're also going to order a forensic, which is where a psychologist is brought in as an expert, and they're going to do a investigation that's going to take months and be very costly, even more costly than the AFC, and the parents are responsible to share in that cost. So it is. At every level. It costs financially, it costs in your relationship with your child, and it could cost in your access to your child and in what the ultimate determination is going to be by the court in terms of custody. So there's a lot of things that come into play, and what we want to talk about today is really the psychological and long-term impacts that disparagement can have on the children. And, as Paige had just said, ways to avoid unintentionally disparaging, your ex-spouse or your co-parent. So
why don't we let Barbara respond a little bit to some of what was just thrown out there with you guys?
When I listen to the two of you talk about how expensive this is going to be, I always tell clients that these are your choices, and you're going to end up with an AFC. You're going to end up with a forensic. It's going to cost you a lot of money. And then the emotional cost, which is what is really enormous. That's my department. And the emotional cost of going through this pulls families apart, where it becomes very hard for them ever to be able to do things together. I try very hard to kind of read Parents' Riot Act and say that even though you divorced, you are parents forever. You may not be spouses, but you're parents forever, especially with these young children. There are millions of decisions you're going to have to make about schools, about medical, about health, about friendships, about what the child does, what kind of activities they do. If you can't get along, and one person is holding the child against the other, there'll be no relationship. There's one, I'm going to tell you one story which always broke my heart. A couple I was working with, there was a lot of alienation in this situation, and the father did not see his daughter for a long period of time, and she was graduating from high school. This was last year when there was a high school graduation, not like COVID where there's no graduations, but this was last June. She was graduating from high school, and she wanted her father to be there because she cared about him, and she saw him once in a while, and she said, I don't feel good about going to graduation and not having my dad there. And her mother said, that's ridiculous. He doesn't spend time with you. He shouldn't be there. So she chose not to go to high school graduation. And I thought that was tragic. to have a kid who was 17 who chose not to go to a high school graduation because her parents couldn't get along. We talk about effects on children. What does this do to a kid?
Well, and I think you're even like, that's a 17-year-old that is closer to adulthood than they are to childhood at that point. And what does that lead to into their adulthood and their own relationships, right?
The girl was devastated. And it's interesting because parent alienation sometimes backfires, because here her mother told her how bad her father was, and she didn't see her father for a long time. But then she was furious at her mother because her mother couldn't get it together to let father come to graduation. So she became angry at her mother also. And here you had this kid who felt like she had no parents she could rely on.
So nobody's a winner. Nobody's winning. No, it may feel good in the moment, but nobody's going to win there, right?
This is parents taking out anger that they have for the other parent and using the child. This kid was innocent. This kid had nothing to do with the divorce, had nothing to do with the fact that there might have been multiple affairs in this situation. I have very strong feelings that children should not be involved in adult drama. Adults have their own issues. They might have affairs. They might have financial issues. They might have anger issues. This is not for children to be involved in. If parents have financial issues because dad didn't pay child support, this has nothing to do with the child. You want to make your children feel secure in their lives. You don't want them to worry that mom can't pay the rent. This is between the parents.
And I just want to say that's how the court feels. So the court feels as though, the children should not be involved in the litigation any more than they have to in terms of speaking to their attorney or, speaking to therapists or psychologists. And if there's a forensic, there's a little bit of participation there, but they don't, it is a form of disparagement and alienation for, one parent who should be receiving child support to say the other parent is not providing the child support, they're not paying the child support. That may seem not that big a deal to the parent saying it. I'm just explaining why they can't join this organization or why they can't, do this activity because, your dad doesn't pay or your mom doesn't pay. That is a form, and so we need our clients, to understand and parents to understand that they need to avoid doing that. I mean, if you slip up and say something in a scared moment because you're not able to pay the rent, is that going to be detrimental to your case? That's not as bad as if you're intentionally telling the child things like, what Barbara just described. I mean, that's horrible. And there will be long-term consequences on the parent who is doing the alienating their relationship with the children. It's just inevitable that eventually your children are going to grow up and they're going to feel resentment towards you for speaking ill of their other parent. It's just...
What often happens is a child bonds with the parent who is the favored parent because they don't have anybody else and they feel scared. And oftentimes that child's afraid to have too much conflict with the parents, especially when they're young, because they're co-opted. And they feel they have to take care of their parent because their parent is sad or their parent is upset or their parent is angry and they don't see the other parent anyway. So they have taken on the parent's anger, sadness, hurt, and they've taken on those feelings against the other parent when it had nothing to do with them. It could have been a fun parent. I've spoken to children who I've said, well, tell me about what your relationship used to be like with dad. Oh, he used to play ball with me. He was fun. We used to go out to dinner. I used to love spending time with dad. I said, what happened? I'm not sure. And what really happened is mom got angry at dad because this is a couple I worked with. Mom got angry at dad because dad had a new girlfriend 3 or 4 years post-divorce. And the girlfriend had a child. And her child was enjoying this new kid who was spending a lot of time with, and they were bonding and they were thinking about living together. And dad was going to have a new family and incorporate this child, and mom freaked out. So mom started doing all these things to pull her child away from dad and saying all these negative things about dad. And it got to the point that she didn't see him anymore. And she said, I don't like you. You don't understand me. You don't spend time with me. You're not a good dad. And she was saying all these things that had absolutely no basis. But mom had so strongly implanted these things that she began to believe that, and she stopped seeing her father. It was a terrible situation.
That's very, it's really sad. And as you, the three of you are speaking, I'm also thinking about in preparation for this call, we kind of talked about a few different scenarios of what is disparagement, and not, there's like overt and the slippery slope of things that are unintentional. And you all were talking too a little bit about the fact that, especially right now during COVID, we're seeing different levels of some intentional versus unintentional. People are scared. I mean, do you want to maybe speak about that just briefly?
I could address it. It's a really good point, because particularly during COVID, everybody's upset. We're dealing with a pandemic, and I have gotten so many calls. He took her to the park, and took her around people, and he can't do that, and she's gonna get sick, and I'm gonna get sick when she comes back to my house next week. You have to tell him he can't do that. And I have had so many calls like that around the pandemic. What do you do? And first of all, this is hearing from one parent. So then what I do, because I work as a neutral, is I get the other parent and say, what happened? What did you do? Where did you take her? And sometimes he took her to the park around too many people, and there's an issue. We got to talk about it. Sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he took her for a walk near the park. They both wore masks. It was not an issue. And mom freaked out because she's mad at a child. Dad is doing bad things with you, and dad's going to get you sick. And if mom tells that to the child's going to get scared. So my position is, don't involve your child. If you think your ex is doing something wrong with the child, tell each other behind closed doors. Do not say it in front of the child, because that's disparagement. Any negative comment about the other parent where the child is overhearing it is disparagement. And the more a child hears, the more a child feels a loyalty conflict. Doesn't know, who do I believe? Who do I trust? Children need to trust both parents. They love both parents. They want to trust them both. And if they hear negative things, they get confused. They don't know who's right and who's wrong. It's crazy making. And you don't want to do this to your child.
No. And then I know, so that's the emotional side. I know, Lauren and Paige, you've had a couple cases where the parents are holding the kids back, and it's like messing schedules up. And, I'm curious for you guys to respond from your perspective, how it's affecting.
Yeah, so I mean, we have had clients who have, taken the child out of New York City to get away from, the New York City had so many cases, and we've been pleasantly surprised in some situations in like highly contested matters where the parents were able to, once they realized how serious COVID was, and that maybe leaving New York City was the best thing, they worked together. And one parent doesn't have access to the child when they're living in different states. I mean, we have clients who who've had their children in their custody this whole time, and then we have clients who the children are in the custody of the other parent. It's a mixture, and some of them have been able to work together, and it's been a great thing in progress, and hopefully that will result in the custody matters being ultimately resolved. But we have to tell them there is an impact when a child doesn't spend time with the other parent for weeks or months, and that child is going to reasonably be more comfortable with the parent that they've been spending this time with. And it's the parent who had the custody of them. It's their responsibility to encourage the exchange when it happens to go smoothly. I know you haven't seen your dad in a while, but this is going to be fun. He really misses you. You're going to do fun stuff and make up, for lost time. Like those kinds of proclamations to the child or the children are going to ease any conflict that they feel or any loyalty issues that they may feel. And, ultimately we are going to be back in court eventually. We don't know exactly when that's going to happen, like physically back in court.
Yeah.
There's going to be decisions made on these custody issues. And if you were the parent who took advantage of this pandemic, and you blocked access and, did anything to alienate the children or child and said anything, there's going to be consequences in court for that. And the court's going to consider it heavily. I mean, we've had judges make those representations to us that, there's not so much that they can do right in this moment, but ultimately there will be consequences. And I think Barbara could probably speak on, what are some suggestions that she makes to the parents in order to avoid disparagement, and in order to avoid saying negative things in front of or to your children. And I think one of the measures, and I don't know if this works for everybody, is if you wouldn't want the other parent to say it about you to the children, then it's disparagement. If it's not something that you would like to hear somebody else saying about you to other people, you shouldn't be saying that to your children about your partner or your spouse or whomever, other parent is. So,
yeah, sorry, Lauren, I just want to jump in and sort of frame what both you and Barbara have said, which is, if you're looking for guidance, really just sort of a rule of thumb on what is disparagement, it sounds like, and please jump in, Barbara, if you want to add anything here, but one, if you're angry and you're about to say something about the other parent, just stop. So if you are feeling emotional, just stop. And if it's negative and you should have a liberal definition of what is negative when you're talking about the other parent, it's probably disparagement. And then one point I wanted to just, sort of highlight that Lauren made is in the midst of this pandemic, if you do have a custody arrangement where you were able to modify that and perhaps, leave the state with your child or keep your child for longer than you normally would under your regular parenting schedule, you should not let that embolden you to take advantage of that as an opportunity to try and permanently, modify your custody arrangement. And we have a judge here down in Manhattan. His name's Judge Sunshine. He issued a letter very early on during the pandemic that says, the way that the judges think about custody arrangements is what do they think that you will do when the judge isn't watching? And this is that scenario happening in real time. So Lauren's point about the judges, reviewing what decisions have been made and how you've been able to co-parent and act as a responsible custodial parent during this time when the courts are closed, those things will be reviewed and they will have an impact on permanent custody determinations. So
I'm so glad you mentioned Judge Sunshine's letter because I've read it. I think it's wonderful.
It was wonderful.
I've sent it out to certain clients.
Yeah, we did.
To clients who were really difficult. So I'm going to go to court and I said, you want to see what the court's going to say? And read this letter.
For anyone who's watching, let us know if you're interested in seeing that letter because
it's a wonderful letter. And it's be your best self. And we're living in a pandemic, and be your best self. And it says a lot more, but that's in essence the message. And it's a very positive message for people to really help each other out. I've had some clients who've been really wonderful, leaving the city and finding ways to meet each other out of the city. And somebody rented an Airbnb that got cleaned and spent time there so they can go back and forth with the child in Vermont. And I thought it was terrific. They were able to do it. I have another couple I'm working with where the father will not allow the mother to change a week-to-week schedule. She rented a house upstate so she could take the child away for the summer every other week. And he won't allow her to go week in a week because they have a 2-5-5-2 schedule. And he wants to say, he said, this is our schedule, we need to keep it. And he refused to amend it to a week in a week for the summer for vacation. So, some people are really difficult and some people have been really amenable to make this work during COVID.
Okay, I want to do a time check. So, because I want to make sure we are leaving time for Q&A. I also want to recognize the participant who raised their hand on the letter. I've noted you, and we will send you that letter post the call. So we heard, we saw. Barbara, I want to make sure we cover a couple things with you in particular before we go. And again, participants, if you have a question you want to ask, we're not going to name you. Don't worry. Just shoot it to me, though, in the Q&A. take this opportunity. If you want to also, though, connect with us offline, we also understand that. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We can also put you directly in touch with Barbara post-call. So couple things. Can you give us like maybe 3 top things that you could recommend that parents do? Like, I liked what Paige said, is just if you're feeling angry, stop. Just stop. But maybe do you have some other very practical things that our participants could recommend?
If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. It's very simple.
That's what we learned in kindergarten.
You need to be the parent. And if somebody's really angry, I said, just shut your mouth. Don't say anything. And sometimes during transitions, and somebody's really angry, and you're bringing a child to the other parent, instead of making a nasty comment, just keep your mouth shut. If you say, hi, how are you? Very nice. If you can't say that, don't say anything. Just give your kid a hug and say hello or say goodbye and don't talk. That's better than something negative. So that's the first very, very simple thing. The next thing is, if you're unhappy with something the other parent did, don't discuss it in front of the child. This should be discussed behind closed doors, where the child is asleep or at school or whatever, not around. You should not be discussing issues in front of your child, because this puts your child in the middle. And to be really aware that when you put your child in the middle, your child will suffer. If something is going on, you certainly have to deal with it, and I'm not saying you shouldn't. And do not deal with it in front of your child. It's very, very, very important.
I think it's an interesting distinction, right? Speaking directly to your child about the other parent is one thing, but just speaking in front of your child is also, that falls under the umbrella here. And so if you're talking to another family member, and it can get back to your child.
Absolutely. And if you're on the telephone, don't badmouth your ex to your best friend when your child is also next to you.
Within earshot.
Because your child will hear it.
Yeah.
So you need to really be careful. You do this to protect your child, not to protect your ex. As you can hate your ex, it's fine. You can be furious with what your ex did. It's really okay. But protect your child. It's really important to protect your child. And your child doesn't want to hear it.
Well, your child didn't choose to marry that person.
I didn't hear what you said.
I said your child didn't choose to marry that person. So
make that choice. I often say that to people. Listen, you had a child together, and now you're stuck together forever.
Yeah.
So you have to deal with it, and deal with it the best possible ways that you can.
Right.
You are in this.
Right. So Barbara, I also can you explain a little bit about what your role as a parent coordinator is and what that means? Because I think that there could be some participants who might be interested in what that role is.
As a parent coordinator, I work with parents who are in conflict over co-parenting. And most of the time, I meet with both parents together. Occasionally, I do an individual meeting with each one of them. And what we talk about are what are the issues that obstruct you getting along together so you can be the best possible parents. I talk about changing the relationship from being a romantic relationship when you were together to being a business relationship. And you have a business of co-parenting. And you want to do that well. And you're business partners. So how can you do that? What are the issues? What are the problems? And I try to get parents to talk about consistency. Children, particularly young children, when they go back and forth from house to house, and I have a lot of joint custody families where kids are half and half, if you can have more or less the same rules, it really helps. If you can have more or less the same kind of structure, it really helps. If one parent says absolutely no sugar, we're being vegan, and the other, all they eat is junk food, this kid's going to be very confused. It's very difficult, and I've had that situation.
I'm sure.
People can be a little bit different and know that one parent's a vegetarian, doesn't eat this, but indulge your child. If they really want a hamburger, let them have a hamburger.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. And if there's media rules, and in one house that it's very, very strong media rules, and the other house has no media rules, the child's going to say, I hate being in the house because dad takes away my iPad or my phone, and mom doesn't. Mom lets me play games as long as I want. There should be some general agreement. And there's not a right and wrong, I generally say to parents, figure out what you think is right. Let's make an agreement, and both of you stick to the agreement the two of you can make. I'm not coming down with an agreement. Unless it's really bizarre, then I'll come down and give an opinion. As a PC, I will make an opinion, and I'll make a recommendation. But I try to get people in more mediation mode to sign on to what they feel. And if they both agree, they're more likely to carry it out. Because if people work through a problem-solving approach and decide together, this is what's best for our child, they're more engaged with it and they're more likely to follow through. So that's what I try to do as a parent coordinator.
All right. And then the other thing I want to make sure that our participants receive is some resources that they can go to. I know that you're involved with some organizations. Not everybody can afford to have a parent coordinator. Can you kind of share some resources that people can go to?
The best place in New York is Family Kind. Family Kind is an organization that offers all kinds of services for parents who are divorcing. They have mediation, they have parent coordinators, they have parent education classes, and everything's on a sliding fee scale. So I encourage everybody to, they also have lots of blogs, they have things on their website. I encourage everybody to look online for Family Kind and get the information they can get a lot of help.
Julia,
And if people want to read things, just go online and put in a topic. The internet's amazing. You can find anything you want. So there's things to read on many, many, many subjects, so you can become informed.
if I can just touch on that quickly, we recommend, if you are just starting out in this divorce process and you're having a hard time emotionally, that a therapy is something that we recommend people consider. It's difficult to not speak out in anger, and to always make the right decision in terms of your kids when you're in a lot of pain, and we understand that these matters are so painful. A family, if you're dealing with like a broken family, and if you need extra help and assistance through therapy or counseling, to deal with the emotional consequences of what's happening, that is not a weakness. That is, it's a good thing to go out and get help. And I think from what Barbara was saying, Family Kind offers those types of resources on a sliding scale. So I just wanted to say that as an attorney, I would recommend that any client who is in a lot of pain and struggling with the emotions, that it is going to be beneficial for the custody case for that person or both people to go and get therapy. And there's nothing to say that just because you're divorcing doesn't mean you can't go to therapy in addition to having a co-parenting counselor, but a therapy for the emotional aspects of it as like you're not doing it as a couple anymore, but you're doing it as co-parenting, getting the therapy. And therapy can change the circumstances completely. So
I'd like to address one thing you said, Lauren. I come from a very positive perspective, and I don't believe families break. I don't believe in a broken family. I don't think families break. I think what happens is families change their structure. And oftentimes when there are parents separate, I like the term of the binuclear family, because that's in fact what happens. It's still the nuclear family, but it becomes a binuclear family. And both parents become important. If we talk about families being broken, then children feel there's something wrong. And I like 50% of people divorce. So I like to not say it as wrong. I mean, you've said that you agree that it's not wrong, and you're not crazy, and nothing's wrong with you if you go to therapy. So if we look at an even more positive perspective, it's just a way to deal with the transition. And oftentimes therapy deals with transitions in people's lives. And just sometimes getting help with little things, like I've heard moms say it to little children, I'm so sad that you're going to Dad's. I'm going to miss you so much. I don't know what I'm going to do without you. And hug and kiss and not want the child to let go of the child. Now, the sentiment is lovely, except for the fact the child then starts feeling guilty about leaving. feels really terrible that for the mom was, what is mom going to do? One child said to me, I don't know what mom does when I'm not there. I worry about mom. Now, children shouldn't worry about moms, and children shouldn't be upset to worry about moms. Children, I talk to parents about, don't tell your kids that you're sad they're leaving. You should say, I'm going to see you next week. You'd have a great time at Dad's house. And somebody said that earlier, that give a positive for what they're going to have, so they don't end up feeling in the middle and feeling bad.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree with you. Maybe it just feels broken to the parents at that point in time, and that's where we come in to give them the resources that they need so that they can, I think it's great. And I know, Paige and I, we're familiar with family, and we think it's a great organization, and we would recommend that anybody, go there to get what they need. Because we understand this is difficult and it's hard, and a lot of what we're saying seems like common sense to me, but when you're emotionally in the middle of this turmoil, it's not so easy to see your way out of it. So that's why we want to have conversations like this and get this information out there and get you thinking about what is disparagement and alienation, because you might not even fully understand what it is. So
it sounds like it can be a slippery slope. And so, I think the biggest takeaway is, while there is a very practical side to it from Lauren and Paige's perspective, if you're going through a custody dispute, there is also just that's going to come and go. Your custody dispute is going to come and go, but the effects that it leaves for the long term are not. So I just want to make sure that none of the participants have any additional questions before we start to wrap this up. And one thought that just came to mind is that going through a divorce it's a difficult time, and I love that Lauren, that Lauren and Paige really focus on the wellness and the wholeness of not just their client, but the family unit, and what you can do to make this easier. So this is just an example of one way that they're doing this as a firm. And Barbara, we're so glad that you came on to join us today. Next week, actually, we're doing another coffee talk, and next week's one is going to be about another partner that you might need within your divorce. And that's, and you need a lot of people in your camp when you're going through this, right? To make it through in a very healthy way. We're going to have Stacey Francis from Francis Financial join us, and she is just a phenomenal powerhouse in helping people get their finances in order. And so, there's just a lot of people that you kind of need in your camp as you're going through this. So that's about what I would have to say to wrap it up. Oh, wait, it looks like we might have a question. Let me see. Go ahead. You guys, you have any last? No, we're good.
I would offer one more framing tip. And we tell this to our clients. Apart from the way you're feeling emotionally, if that doesn't do it for you, and this is something you can carry into your conversations with other people as well, but we tell our clients, pretend the judge is watching. With every email that you send your ex, with everything you're saying to your child that has to do with their other parent, just pretend the judge is on your shoulder listening. And if you would feel at all uncomfortable or second guess what you're about to say, again, throw up the stop sign, pump the brakes, think about it again. Think about it a little more before you make a mistake. So that's a really good, helpful rule of thumb that we tell our clients.
Yeah.
All right.
And did you get the question, Julie?
No, we're good. It was somebody saying thank you, actually. So, but I couldn't see that until I clicked.
Part of the words that I would say is just think about your children and keep them out of the middle if you want happy, healthy kids. That's the most important thing.
And thank you, Barbara, for joining us. The anecdotes that you shared, I think they're just really helpful in illustrating, just illustrating how long alienation and disparagement can go on for, like, how long it can last. I mean, the story about, the 17-year-old who didn't get to go to graduation. I don't think that anybody wants to be that parent that causes that result. So, and, I thank you for the work that you do. And
Can I make one last comment? What I didn't say, which is really also important, is that kids who grow up in alienated families end up having difficulty in their own adult relationships. And that's important to remember, because they've never had a model of any kind of positive relationship. And they've never had a model of dealing with conflict in any kind of positive way. If they get in a relationship and there's an argument, they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to have an argument and solve it. In a healthy family, there's always arguments. But the idea is to have an argument, resolve it, and get over it. And kids who come in these alienated families don't know how to do that. So that long-term impact is tremendous on adult relationships and causes a lot of people to go into therapy as adults to have to undo all the things that happened to them as children so they can have a productive relationship as an adult.
Yeah. Wise words. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us this week. And we'll be sending information out about next week's. It's on Tuesday next week. So more to come.
Great. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.